ओपन अ विंडो कि जी के जो एनपीओ वगैरह है वो भी जमा कराते हैं, उनको भी नहीं पूछेंगे, वो तो एनपीओ है. डू यू नो हाउ मच notes were returned? Out of 17,000 billion expectation, 16,000 बिलियन वापस. तो जितनी पैरेलल इकोनॉमी आपकी होगी उतना आपका टैक्स बर्डन इनडायरेक्ट टैक्स पे ज्यादा जाएगा. बिकॉज कि अगर आइडेंटिफायर नहीं है और मेरे पास एक अच्छी बेस मेरे पास मौजूद है. डोंट फॉरगेट कि आपके पास दुनिया के सबसे ज्यादा टैक्स पेयर है मोबाइल फोन की जो विदहोल्डिंग हुई थी, जो आप डैम फंड में जा रही होगी, तो वो वाली डेटाबेस को आपने एक्सप्लोर नहीं किया, डेटा क्रंचिंग नहीं की है. अगर मैं लिख के दे दूं कि जी कि ये एक आपका मोबाइल फोन का आपने लिया, आपका ये विदहोल्डिंग टैक्स कटा है, आप अपना रिटर्न फाइल करके ये रिफंड क्लेम कर लें, तो मैं अपना टैक्स पेयर ऐड करता रहूंगा. बट व्हाट दे आर फियरिंग कि यार वो कहीं रिफंड बाकी क्लेम ना कर ले और जब मैं विड्रॉल कर रहा हूं वो कहीं ना चला जाए. हमने 21 लाख कमर्शियल शॉप्स का डेटा मसूद साहब और ये बैठे हुए प्रो बोनो उनको दे दिया जियो टैगिंग के साथ एफबीआर को, टैक्स रिफॉर्म्स इंप्लीमेंटेशन कमीशन. हम ब्लेम इसलिए नहीं लेना चाह रहे, हमने सब कुछ किया. एंड यू नो व्हाट वाज द रिप्लाई कि हमारे पास मोटरसाइकिलें नहीं है कि हमारे नोटिस डिलीवर. तो वी आर हेल्पलेस, वी कैन मेरली गाइड. सो दिस इज एग्नी ऑफ द सिचुएशन. मीडिया इज हियर, मीडिया नोज मोस्ट ऑफ द थिंग्स एंड दे आल्सो माशाल्लाह दे आर डूइंग देयर रोल. बट निजाम ऐसा हो गया है कि कान पे जूं तक नहीं रही थी और इनके इतने बड़े बड़े टारगेट्स हैं, इनको हम कुछ कहने जाते हैं तो बोलता है जी टारगेट नहीं होगा. जैसे आप देख रहे हैं 255 बिलियन टारगेट ऑफ है आपका. शब्बर साहब सवाल करेंगे, खुद देना पड़ेगा विद द कंडीशन. आप जापान मॉडल है, आप जापानीज मॉडल है ना, सवाल जवाब दोनों खुद दें. भाई शब्बर साहब को
we have been talking about reforms in the morning, but my personal view after looking at the economy of Pakistan and deeply, especially the fake account case in the banks and the Benami transaction in the banks, I personally feel that all the reform in tax will not achieve the desired result unless we have a banking sector fundamental reforms and a foreign exchange law fundamental reforms. I personally feel in this, if we are only doing this side of fiscal reform, we are wasting our time. Because we know, we all Pakistanis know, this foreign exchange, there are LCs where the 50% invoice is sold, amount is sold. Adib Sahab, the question is, Saman said, please. Please, Saman said. I personally feel we have to talk about the comprehensive economic reform for the country, not the fiscal reform, because when we talk about the fiscal reform, then my personal view, our attentions are diverted. Because the banking sector is actually facing a serious issue we don't want to discuss publicly.
Sir.
And at the same time, the foreign exchange law, the exchange companies, the hawala, the hundis and everything, we all know we are all part of this. So unless we have a comprehensive economic package for revitalizing this economy of the country, this one segmental part of this discussion will not be rooted. I just comment on it.
Sir, last FATF mein, we were asked from ICAP, myself, Iftikhar Taj and Suhail Malik, we went there, and I was asked by the delegate head, Mr. Gordon of Scotland Yard, okay, give us one avenue which can be clipped and money laundering can be stopped substantially, not obviously. So I said real estate. 60% is real estate. Hawala, hundi, yes, everything is there. Banking, Abid Saab has a great idea to tag all NTN numbers with this current accounts. So we are there. We are not sleeping. The laws are there. आपका बेनामी law भी है, आपका AML का law भी है, 2007 से ordinance है आपका. चाहे भले कॉपी पेस्ट किया हो हमने कहीं से, इसमें काफी चीजें हैं. आप मुझे ये बताएं ना, कोई आज ये सोचे डॉक्टर साहब मुझे शायद जवाब दे देंगे, बाकी मेरे पास तो जवाब नहीं है. डॉक्टर साहब, Okay, we were in the black on FATF list, then on grey, and then alhamdulillah white, again on grey. So where we were wrong? And now we are talking about Allah na karege black.
Buying the import of US dollar in the bundles at the airport. This is the one of the condition. So what I'm saying, I think this is what you're saying is from inside. This is not a question of inside.
Sir, in that condition,
what we have to decide it. We have messed up too much for the last 30 or 40 years, and now we have to decide this is one way or other.
You are right, sir.
हम इस तरह बात
Thank you very much. All the panelists.
एक चीज मैं बात करना चाहता शब्बर साहब ने जो बात की, I think that's a very important question and fits in the macro package. लेकिन जो economic growth और taxation का relationship नहीं, लेकिन मैं उसमें कहना ये चाहता कि अगर आप देखें एक दफा डिसाइड कर लें कि टैक्स पॉलिसी, टैक्स कलेक्शन अथॉरिटीज का स्ट्रक्चर क्या होगा, फिर उसके जो बैंकिंग है, फॉरेन एक्सचेंज, वो उसको साथ सप्लीमेंट करेंगे। लेकिन वो पहले एक चीज तो हो जाए ना, जो कि
शाना साहब, these words हम अपने सेशन को जो है वो इख्तिताम की तरफ लेके जाते हैं। I thank you all the worthy panelists and the speaker for this wonderful session. In fact, which is transpired is that nature and mechanism of taxation in a country needs to be reviewed in a wider economic perspective rather than its confinement towards the prevailing laws only. Thank you very much. Over to Amara.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mansoor. Now we would be proceeding for the memento distribution. And to do the honors, I would like to invite Mr. Masood Ali Naqvi, past President ICAP, to come on stage and do the honors. Ladies and gentlemen. And Mr. Shabar Zaidi Saab also to accompany Mr. Masood Ali Naqvi on the stage. And Mr. Jafar Hussain Saab, President ICAP. And Mr. Awais, Muhammad Awais, Council Member ICAP, to please come on stage and do the honors. One by one, I would request Mr. Shahnawaz Mahmood to receive the memento first. Okay, I think we are proceeding to... Yes. One by one, so first, Mr. Shahnawaz Saab to receive the memento. I would request rest of the participants to be seated. Okay, we can have a... Thank you very much, Mr. Shahnawaz Mahmood. Now I would request Mr. Ziaul Mustafa, President ICMAP, to receive the memento.
you are panel.
maybe in future, but not right now.
Thank you, Mr. Ziaul Mustafa Saab. Now I would request Mr. Nasrus Samad Qureshi Saab to receive the memento, ladies and gentlemen. You, yes, Nasrus Samad Qureshi Saab. Thank you, Nasr Saab. Now I would request Mr. Zubair Tufail to receive the memento. Now I would request our distinguished speaker of the session, Mr. Abdul Alim Saab, to receive the memento.
चेंज कराना है आपको।
आप मुझे अपना पूरा वो प्रेडिक्शन आपका है मेरे पास। ये मैं कह
कार्ड
रहा
आपका है।
हूँ नहीं है नीम साहब के नहीं आ रहा वो तो भागा भागा
Thank you, Abdul Alim Saab. Now I would request Mr. Ishfaq Tola Saab to receive the memento. Okay. Now I would request our moderator, Mr. Mansoor Zegam, to receive the memento. Now I would request all the participants to come for a group photograph. Please. Thank you very much for all esteemed participants. जी चाय जी बड़ी अच्छी चीज होती है जब किसी का इंतजार करना हो तो बहुत जरूरी हो जाती है इंतजार करना आसान हो जाता है
Actually, we have been informed by the PSO of Mr. Asad Umar, Honorable Finance Minister, that he is busy in cabinet meeting और 4 बजे वो timing confirm कर देंगे कि what time he is coming. So please have a cup of tea.
देखिए ना आपकी लिमिट लगी है ना फॉरेन से अब मुझे ये समझ आया कि चलो सब क्या कह रहे हैं लिमिट भी लगी हुई है इम्प्लीमेंटेशन नो मैं कह रहा हूँ कि इम्प्लीमेंटेशन को यहाँ पे क्या लेके जाते छोटे लोग
ठीक है। नहीं आप लोग जाए मैं अल्लाह के शुक्र सलाम क्या हो रहा है अच्छा
ये अब क्या वो 6 बजे तक 7 बजे तक नहीं आएगा तो ये सुधार करेंगे और वही आखिरी वही स्पीकर है और इनका और कोई काम नहीं What program, sir?
Wasting hours, writing minutes on that.
नहीं वो तो अब नहीं अब क्या अब सीधी मैंने तो तस्वीर नहीं दी हाँ वो तो शिविर के साथ नहीं गए मतलब ऐसा एविडेंस चाहिए मेरे कमरे में नहीं गए तो मैं वापस आया तो साथ में मेरे को औरत थी तो सीधे का वीडियो आपको बताइए मेरा क्या रिश्ता है तो ये अपना रजिस्टर आ रही है नहीं आ रही तो नहीं आ रही आपको आई थिंक यू मस्ट बी कहना है मतलब क्या कहना है वही कहना जो मुझे हाँ है गाँव उसे तो
Ladies and gentlemen, you are requested to be seated. We are about to resume. Ladies and gentlemen, you are requested to be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, let's resume our last concluding session. This is the time that we are going to hear from our keynote speaker, Mr. Dr. Hafiz A. Pasha. He is a distinguished economist of Pakistan who has been the chairman of the Planning Commission's panel of economists, an independent advisory committee. And he has been a former Federal Minister for Finance and Economic Affairs. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a huge round of applause for Mr. Dr. Hafiz A. Pasha on stage.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Honorable office bearers of the various associations, members of the profession of accountants, ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid the present Prime Finance Minister has not arrived. He was supposed to be part of this event towards the end of the conference. So I'm afraid you'll have to make do with a person who may have been a finance minister 20 years ago. So I'll try and do my best to be contemporary and provide you with some insight about what's happening today in Pakistan and what we need to do to perhaps to move ahead. Let me start by saying that some of the ideas that we presented here have already been written and published in various newspapers. And particularly, I would like to acknowledge the support and cooperation that I've received from one of my esteemed colleagues at the Beacon House National University, Mr. Shahid Kardar. Shahid Kardar Saab is an esteemed member of your profession. So I have already been communicating with the chartered accountant. So what you will get today is a mix between an economic analyst and a very seasoned chartered accountant. Let me start by giving you some good news. The good news is that over the last 5 years, Pakistan's tax to GDP ratio has gone up substantially. Let us recognize for once that there is some good news. And in fact, Pakistan's tax to GDP ratio has gone up from something like 9.6% to 13% of the GDP, an increase of over 3% of the GDP, which is approximately 1,000 billion rupees. So well done, whoever was doing the tax policy, and clearly, for most of the time, it was a very esteemed chartered accountant who was doing the tax policy. So you were right there in the saddle, and you seem to have delivered. And we also must recognize these are subject to much chagrin and criticism and so on and so forth, and that is this Federal Board of Revenue, which has become the target for a lot of criticism. Somehow or the other, they came together, the tax policy side, the tax administration side, they raised the tax to GDP ratio by 3 percentage points. This last time it happened was in the early 90s, when we reached again 13%. Since then, it was falling. It fell steadily. Even during the esteemed era of Abdullah Yusuf, it remained at about 10.5% of the GDP. Mind you, after he left, it fell to 9.5% of the GDP. So Abdullah Saab had managed to keep it going. But it did increase. And the bottom line is that much of this increase took place during the 3 years of the IMF Extended Fund Facility Program from 2013 to 2016. You may ask the question, how was this exceptional growth of something like doubling of the revenue achieved in 5 years? Phenomenal. The answer is, it was a skillful, perhaps not so obvious combination of normal growth in tax revenues linked to an economy which was beginning to grow faster, and of course, a series of moves in enhancement of tax rates. We have not seen historically this kind of unprecedented enhancement in tax rates. One of my PhD students just did some research and he told me, sir, out of this doubling of revenues, near doubling of revenues, tax revenues in the last 5 years, 55% was due to the normal growth of the tax bases like industry, imports, and so on. 45% was due to higher tax rates. Clearly, there are limits to such a strategy. What were those big enhancements in tax rates? You may have forgotten by now some of those big moves. The first was, amazingly, import duties used to be a dying source for a long time. The effective rate of import duty raised from 6% to 9% in these 5 years. And 40% of the imports of basic commodities, consumer goods, food items, was originally exempt, was subjected to 3% flat minimum import tax. Now that obviously means who was bearing this burden? You know who. Second, there was a windfall gain from the precipitous decline in oil prices. Sales tax rates were raised, skyrocketed. At one time, you will be amazed, and I'm sure you know, that the sales tax rate on high-speed diesel was 51%, 3 times the standard rate. And who bears the burden of the high-speed? Basic transportation of goods and for the people at large. And the third big move was a lateral expansion in the presumptive and withholding tax regime, particularly into some regressive areas, and the creation of a new category of taxpayers called non-filers. And these non-filers were subjected to a very large differential in the tax rate. So effectively, the tax rates on withholding tax also went up. I have had a moral problem with this issue. Yes, you do want to punish genuine non-filers who are tax evaders, but for God's sake, there are millions of Pakistanis, but for example, in the telecom sector, when we had the sales and the income tax, were not taxpayers. The least that we needed to do was to not make this a fixed tax, but made it perhaps an advanced tax. And whosoever felt that he had the right to file for return should have been allowed to do so. Instead, all taxes, most of them, barring a few exceptions, were converted into fixed tax so that, as highlighted earlier, there was no issue of refunds. So I'm afraid while we had progress, undeniably in the tax to GDP ratio, and the IMF writing wonderful letters to Washington saying great performance and so on and so forth, the tax system had inherently become much more regressive. And the burden on the poor had fallen to had increased, and it had fallen on them in such a large way that, quite honestly, this was not acceptable. Ladies and gentlemen, let me try and highlight to you, there's a lot of discussion today, and I want to make this point very importantly. If we go into an IMF program, I'm still saying if, because every morning we seem to get some kind of a change in views. Hopefully one day we will lock ourselves into a final position on this. If we go into a fund program and with the fiscal deficit moving towards 7% of the GDP and the tax revenues ratio actually falling this year from 13% to perhaps 12 to 12.5% of the GDP, guess what the fund is going to ask you to do? Raise within the next 2 years the tax to GDP ratio by at least 3 to 4 percentage points. Are we back to the same old cycle of enhancements in tax rates and further burden on the poor? So this is the biggest challenge. Can we genuinely broad-base the tax system? I mean, it is incredible that even today, 72% of the tax burden on industry in Pakistan, 28% is on the remaining 80% of the economy. This is an inherently unfair system which has worked against industrialization. And the other problem, of course, is, as I said earlier, one of my PhD students has studied the incidence of taxes in Pakistan, and it's amazing. As a percentage of income, taxes paid, including income tax, is flat. There is no progressivity in our income tax system today, unfortunately, because this 68% reliance on withholding tax, many of which are on expenditure and on regressive items, has actually made income tax somewhat look like an indirect tax. Ladies and gentlemen, because of the shortage of time, because unfortunately I have a commitment, in an answer to the IMF, what is the true tax potential of Pakistan? We have heard all kinds of estimates. Our Honorable Prime Minister has also mentioned a number. Serious research on determinants of the tax potential done by the United Nations organization in Bangkok recently on a large number of Asian countries indicates that there are three determinants of your tax capacity. One is your income per capita. The other is the share of the informal sector. The third is the share of the agriculture. And of course, sometimes it turns out the share of imports also raises your tax potential. So there are these 3 or 4 criteria for determining the tax potential of a country. And as it turns out, when you apply these coefficients to Pakistan, the estimates we come up for 2019 is that the potential tax to GDP ratio of Pakistan is 17%. This is as far as we can push it. And interestingly, for FBR, the ratio is from 11.2 to 14%. The rest is provincial and other federal taxes. So there is no way the government should agree over the next 3 years of the fund program to anything which exceeds, as far as FBR is concerned, 14% of the GDP, and that is indeed going to be a major challenge, but I can assure you there'll be enormous pressure on us to raise tax revenues indiscriminately without concern of impact on the economy or impact on the relatively poor people. They just want us to raise the tax revenues. So I'm compelled, in conjunction with my dear friend and colleague, Shahid Kardar, we've already written some articles on this, and I'm pleased to report that a few of our ideas have already been taken on board, and we are grateful to the government for that. The first thing I want to say, as I've been accused many years ago of being the father of the withholding tax regime, because I was a key member of the commission of Senator Mazhar Ali. But ladies and gentlemen, the concept at that time was to tax through a withholding advanced tax mechanism, not fixed tax mechanism, only unearned capital incomes. So 3 sources of income were tapped by us: dividends, returns on savings schemes, and bank deposits. And later on, we had one last idea, which was to tax through electricity bills. That was the presumptive, or if you like, withholding tax regime of the mid to late 90s. Thereafter, there has been a veritable explosion. I mean, one day I was telling somebody that next the government might decide that if you want to enter a public toilet, there will be a withholding tax on you because you can't go and do something unless you withhold and pay. I mean, this is carrying things too far. We have something like 64 to 65 sections or subsections of the income tax law, and probably the number is close to now 6 dozen. For God's sake, get out of this. Every single levy must be in the nature of an advance tax. You have to give the so-called non-filer or the filer an opportunity to contest and ask for some relief. And look at the distribution of your withholding tax regime. Only 12 of them give you 86% of the revenue. Only 12 sections of the withholding tax regime give you 86%. The remaining 11 give you another 11%. combined together 97% of withholding tax revenues, which now account for 68% of overall revenues from income tax, come from 23 sources. Keep them. The other 42 to 45 sources are hassles, are interference with business transactions. Withholding agents are put under pressure. This is a system which is giving us 3% revenue. The remaining 40 to 45 levies, keep only those which are very progressive, which have few withholding agents, and which do not interfere with economic activity. So honestly, as a former father, so-called, the father wants to now say too many children have been born. Let's now and see if we can cut the family size. The other similar and linked point is we have to move from the concept of scheduler income taxation, which some or the other came in the earlier part of the century, to a concept of comprehensive income taxation. And in order to do that, by definition, your withholding tax levies on unearned capital income have to be now advanced tax, not fixed tax. And believe me, the progressivity of the income tax system has been jeopardized by the fact that you have a fixed tax on bank deposits and national savings schemes of 10% on filers, whereas their marginal tax rate may be 20, 25%. So we have lost the progressivity of the system by going for a fixed tax regime. And the time has come to open up the system and say, advanced tax, you please include the advanced taxes you've paid in your income declaration, and your marginal tax rate will be determined on total income, and you're not splitting income into different parts. We have to make the tax system more progressive. Then there is this problem, a surfeit of tax expenditures. Tax expenditures are revenues foregone due to concessions and exemptions. Do you know what is the total volume of these exemptions? Again, a very brilliant student of mine has done work with me on this. Today, the cost of tax expenditures to Pakistan is 860 billion rupees. That is close to 2.5% of the GDP. Giveaways, state capture by the elite. I mean, it's amazing. Agricultural income tax, no tax, lifetime exemption to IPPs, no tax on foundations and trusts belonging to you-know-who, so on and so forth. And the banks have got themselves a nice section on writing off a bad debt and so on and so forth. That is a responsibility. Accept the responsibility. If you have bad debt, you're responsible for it. Why should the government bail you out? So there is this state capture process, and the SROs are notorious for this state capture. Imagine Pakistan had a regulatory duty of 20 or 30% on sugar import. Why? Because we wanted to protect our sugar manufacturers, who you know belong to the most privileged sections of our community, and offer an unreasonable price on sugar cane, which would then lead to a demise, effectively, of cotton cultivation in Pakistan. State capture. I don't know, one day, God willing, I thought this government had it in them, but there's no evidence yet, that these onerous SROs and second schedule, third schedule of the income tax and all that has to go. Have lower rates, but no exemptions. I want to unambiguously support the idea which I heard earlier on this afternoon. And that is the idea of a nationally integrated goods and service value-added tax. Pakistan needs this. Believe me, today, the cross transactions, the tax exporting, the race to the bottom, one province bringing down the rate, the other then following suit, and there's all this bottom business going on and competition for tax bases. I mean, today you have a situation, there's 13% in one province, 16% in another, 17% elsewhere, and so on and so forth. This is chaos. Yes, undoubtedly the specialized tax authorities in Punjab and Sindh, SRB and PRA, did a good job. But now we have to integrate the system. We have to have a national value-added tax because the poor provinces in many cases do not get refunds. The federal government has a problem with refunds, rest assured, not with just you or me, the taxpayer, but also with the provinces. So I'm not suggesting for a moment that the Indian experience may be followed because they had a reverse model. They had sales tax of goods in the states and sales tax on services in the union. We had the opposite. Let us try and see if we can come up with a nationally integrated system which benefits everybody. The provinces get more and the federation gets more. I'm willing to bet that life becomes much easier for the ordinary day-to-day taxpayer if we have one nationally integrated system. The other point is that sales tax has to be levied on import of services. Pakistan today, if you exclude freight, and which is already subject to sales tax and some insurance, we have a tax base which is approaching 800 to 900 billion. Clearly, the reverse charge principle, which India and Philippines have already applied, can be applied to Pakistan. And this tax ideally should not be collected by the provinces. It should be collected by the federation. Because more of the transactions like business services, tourism services, so on and so forth, have more of a link with federal entities and banking transactions also. So let's try and expand the tax base for sales tax by applying the reverse charge principle on imports of services. This is a rapidly growing item. One more suggestion, because I'm short of time, otherwise I could spend the rest of the afternoon telling you about possible reforms. The time has come for us to go for some green taxes. You know, historically, we have had at the municipal level a law on dangerous and offensive trades. That law was never really applied because the tax ability to tax of local jurisdictions is very limited. We should apply this green tax concept of, say, 10% or 15% excise duty to discourage some negative activities in terms of impact on the environment and on air pollution. Pakistan today is one of the highest in the world in terms of air pollution. So that would it's not a revenue generating device. It is a device to ensure a cleaner environment. And this government, new government, talks a lot about environment. On import duties, there is this mysterious national tariff policy which has been announced, which apparently has already been subjected to prime ministerial approval, but I at least have not seen the precise elements of the tariff structure that is being proposed. Clearly, we want to liberalize the trade regime. We want to bring down the tariffs on raw materials and intermediate goods. But I'd like to make one suggestion, and that is that we brought down the maximum tariff on finished goods too rapidly from 35 to 20%. And many of our industries, particularly in the context of facing up to competition from competitors like China and India and so on, have not been able to manage. So a little bit of protection to finished goods industry would be recommended. But make life easier and have much lower tariffs for intermediate goods and raw materials. Ladies and gentlemen, before I conclude, I'd like to just throw some ideas because me and my students, we have studied the tax systems of 18 countries of Asia. And I want to highlight to you some innovative and perhaps somewhat, from our viewpoint, unusual, what Tola refers to as out of the box, outside even the box. Do you mind if I present a few to them, to you kindly? My students have done a lot of work on this. India has a 3% education tax on all taxes historically called the education cess. We did have one Ikhra surcharge. It was a bad experiment. We forgot it. We left it in the 80s. Dr. Mehboob al-Haq was the father of that. But can I humbly suggest that given the water scarcity issue and are committing to raising national funds for the dams, Damarabasha and Moment, can we not have a 2% tax called the Water Resources Cess for the purposes of earmarking funds for our dams? This would be a clear signal that Pakistan wants to solve its water problem. And simultaneously, let's get out of this horrible creature called the Gas Infrastructure Development Cess once and for all. It was supposed to have been earmarked. It was never earmarked by the previous government. There are pending liabilities. It's a nightmare. For the future, move out of GIDC into the WRC, which is the Water Resources Cess. This is my humble suggestion, because our children will face a Pakistan of acute water scarcity. The other interesting example, and I say this with a great deal of reticence, but it isn't an Islamic country. It is country called Turkey. It has something called inheritance tax. And we in Pakistan have wondered as to whether the Islamic Council would allow us to do this, but there is a precedent of inheritance tax in a Muslim country. Maybe we could consider this. Bangladesh, strangely enough, not just in exports, but also in tax systems, although the tax to GDP ratio is low, have come up with one or two ingenious ideas. One, when the super tax was being replaced in Pakistan in the last mini budget, we had suggested to the finance minister that please do what the Bangladeshis have done, which is that beyond a certain minimum return on equity, have a slightly higher corporate income tax rate on the additional profit. So those who make extra profit make a somewhat bigger contribution because the higher ability to pay is greater. And believe me, there are some companies in Pakistan, names I will not take, whose returns on equity range from 40 to 60%. And surely they can contribute a bit more to the exchequer. There is a very interesting model in Malaysia where they were worried themselves about this extra investment in property as a speculative measure, which has been referred to by Mr. Tola and others. They've gone ahead and introduced a real capital gains tax, with inflation indexation, but no holding period. There is no holding period. Like in our law, there is a maximum period for levy of capital gains. This can be charged 10 years after you have the first transaction. But it's indexed to inflation and it's real capital gains. That to me is a fair system. Indonesia, of course, has gone in for green taxes. And a very interesting measure in South Pacific countries. Now, very few of you know about these countries. I mean, I used to be the Undersecretary General of the United Nations for 7 years, in charge of Asia and Pacific for the Secretary General. So that's one of the reasons why I know all these details about tax systems in obscure countries. One of the measures taken by South Pacific countries is linking of tax deductibility on financial charges to a maximum debt equity ratio. And if you can do this, believe me, the incentive to go to the stock market will increase enormously. Of course, the banks will always complain, but they have a captive market. Let them face more competition. Let me conclude, ladies and gentlemen, by saying that I'm afraid we will have to go for some short-run measures which will have to be taken in the next budget, because if we go for a fund program, we will be forced to go for some unsavory, unpopular measures. Can I make a few suggestions? And then I'll conclude and rush to a meeting which I was hoping to avoid. All due respects, and I know this will affect you, so forgive me. The basis for tripling the income tax limit from 4 lakhs to 12 lakhs is inherently too big a move. Today, the personal income tax limit is 6 times Pakistan's per capita income. In India, it's 2 times the per capita income. In Bangladesh, it's hardly 3 times. Certainly, there was a case for going to 8 lakhs, but 12 lakhs was a bit too generous. And we've lost 30 to 40 billion straight away because of that, maybe even more. My suggestion would be either you bring the exemption limit down, I'm less likely to promote that, compress the tax slabs beyond 12 lakhs. Today, the maximum rate is being attained at 8 million. Attain the maximum rate at 4.8 million, and you'll have a more progressive tax system. But the middle class professional and the middle class generally will be able to get the benefit of a higher exemption limit. I've already suggested to you that while I would like to see some of the tariffs, we have a 4 import tariff structure, 3, 11, 16, and 20. While we may in fact contemplate some reduction in 3, 11, and 16, I would strongly recommend that we enhance the tax rate at the highest, the maximum rate, to 25% to give some semblance of protection to our domestic industry, which is being ravaged by imports from countries like China, with under-invoicing, with smuggling already referred to, and so on. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, we will have to take one big decision, a comprehensive value-added tax. This is a dream which has to be run through an integrated system of tax collecting institutions. I am optimistic that if we go for broad basing and for more progressive taxation, there will be less political resistance. Most importantly, my own judgment, humble judgment, is that if Pakistan can raise its tax to GDP ratio by 1 percentage point every year, that would be a great achievement. And in 3 years, during the tenure of the program, we're willing to take it from, it'll fall to about 12.5 this year to something like 16%. It can be done, but it has to be based on evidence-based policy and on a tax system which remains committed to collecting in as efficient and as equitable a manner as possible. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for listening.
I would request Mr. Jafar Hussain and Mr. Ishfaq Tola for the memento distribution. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a huge round of applause for Mr. Hafiz Pasha. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now I would request our esteemed president of ICAP, Mr. Jafar Hussain, to come on stage and address the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a huge round of applause.
Thank you, Amara. Honorable past presidents, my council colleagues, learned speakers and panelists, dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. I thank you for coming to National Tax Conference. It is a great occasion for Pakistan that a very large number of stakeholders gathered here today to deliberate and share their insight about the state of affairs of our taxation system and discuss the way forward. It is first of its type organized by the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Pakistan. I congratulate Fiscal Laws Committee of ICAP and its chairman, Mr. Ishfaq Tola, for organizing such a wonderful conference. Today, everyone in the country knows that our economy is in a bad shape. Every expert and every anchor on media channels is crying himself hoarse, repeating the reasons for such sorry state of affairs. Every columnist and blogger has the same conclusion about the state of economy. Today, there is a general consensus in the country that things cannot continue in their present manner. Everyone understands that there is no easy way out. Politics aside, people of Pakistan are willing to give their due share to alleviate the crisis. This is obvious from the fact that in spite of increase in electricity and gas tariffs, depreciation of Pakistani rupee, and increase in inflation during the last 6 months, there are no demonstrations on the streets and there are no other major backlash for the political government. I consider it a major achievement of the government that they have been able to make people realize about the gravity of the situation. Ladies and gentlemen, people of Pakistan generally understand that without collecting taxes consistently, we will not be able to come out of this situation. It is also evident that number of filers in this country is very low. We all know that our tax to GDP ratio is one of the lowest in the region. We also know that government has very few other sources of revenue, and if tax revenue is not increased, we are not left with any other option except begging and borrowing. Is it not strange that with all this knowledge of the problem and a broad understanding of the possible solutions, we are still not able to improve our economic condition? Is our analysis of the situation wrong, or we have not been able to implement correct measures to remedy the situation? Or whatever was required to be done has been done and we are expecting too much in too short a time? This is a question we have been trying to answer, I think, for the last 7 months, and we have not been able to answer. Ladies and gentlemen, when we look at our tax laws and taxation system historically, we find many peculiarities. We brought a new income tax ordinance in 2001 with new concepts of assessment, revised power structures, and a concept of taxpayers in terms of facilitating him by way of simplifying the law and believing in him. Today, after 18 years of implementing the ordinance, we have made changes in that law that have almost converted it to the old ordinance of 1979. And whatever of the new ordinance is left in the statute book is not being practiced. How we have turned the concept of audit and an evidence-based assessment as provided in the Income Tax Ordinance 2001 into the same old discretionary assessment based on presumptions, surmises, and conjectures is known to every taxpayer and practitioner. I have raised this point not as a complaint. I have raised this to rather highlight a more serious matter. This situation indicates that either our tax laws are not based on proper research, or we as tax regulators and collectors are not ready to accept the changes in the law that require a change in mindset also. We have been moving in circles, so I would say that all of us should be now praying, Ehdina Siratal Mustaqima. कुछ सीधा रास्ता हमें मिले जिस पे हम चलना शुरू हों, क्योंकि ये तो सर्कल्स में मूव हो रहा है मुसलसल. वही चेंजेस हम हर 5-6 साल के बाद देखते हैं कि एक चेंज करते हैं, 6 साल के बाद वही चेंज दोबारा स्टैट्यूट बुक में होती है. Distinguished participants, we know that to increase the tax revenue, we need to document our economy. This is not a new knowledge. Every country in the world which has a sizable tax to GDP ratio had first documented its economy one way or the other. We also know that indirect taxation on the one hand increases inflation, and on the other hand, if it is at the cost of direct taxation, it increases inequality in the distribution of wealth. In early 90s, we brought a fundamental change in our taxation law that not only undermined the cause of documentation, but also practically converted income tax to an indirect tax. Final tax regime, as it is known in our tax laws, is used sparingly even in the developing countries to bring those incomes into the tax ambit which usually escape taxation due to their proximity to illegality. We in Pakistan are taxing our imports, exports, supplies and contracts under these provisions. Having such provisions on the statute book for quarter of a century, when each successive government talked about documentation and broadening of tax base, raised serious doubts about the seriousness of the successive governments in this matter. It is often said, and rightly so, that in the present time, broadening of tax base, documentation of economy, and increase in tax revenue, all three can be achieved by collection and analysis of information through the use of technology. May I state that we have been receiving information about electricity bills, bank accounts, and transactions of properties for quite some time. Why that information had not been used to achieve these objectives? Before embarking upon a full-fledged project of automation, etc., it will be worthwhile to inquire into the causes of this phenomenon and appropriate corrective measures, if required, are taken. Taxation laws world over require some change annually to take into account experience, adjustments, and to address administrative problems being faced by the taxpayers. However, fundamentals of laws affecting business models of the entrepreneurs require relative permanence. In the absence of such stability, the businesses that can manage to remain outside the tax net prefer to do so, and those who cannot usually build a factor for uncertainty in their feasibility, which again affects the common man. Ladies and gentlemen, Federal Board of Revenue is our tax collector. It prepares federal budget in which targets for tax collection are set, and it also proposes changes in the taxation laws. Having all three very important functions of the government under one roof not only puts enormous pressure on the available resources of FBR, it also creates a situation of conflict of interest that is affecting the taxation environment of the country. If state expects its citizens to pay their due taxes, it must create an environment of justice and fair play. A state that does not treat its citizens fairly never gets the cooperation of its people and thus never progresses. These are not my words. It is a finding of research carried out into the affairs of failed and successful nations. In our taxation laws, first appeal is with the person who is a departmental officer. And when we go for second appeal in the tribunal, almost every accountant member is an officer of the revenue service posted on judicial duty. Ladies and gentlemen, mindsets don't change with a change in roles. Providing justice in the revenue matters is more a matter of right mindset than anything else. I'm sure the present government, that is the government of Tehreek-e-Insaf, and has provision of justice as its topmost agenda, will look into this situation. Ladies and gentlemen, with the increase in complexities in the business environment and advent of modern specialized technologies, need for specialists and professionals in almost every walk of life have been inevitable. Our revenue services are no exception to this. I am confident that the government is not only aware of this phenomenon, it must be also making changes in the legal framework to make induction of professionals in regular and special cadres of civil services. Present government has to its credit good intentions and a strong resolve for the change for the better. Choosing the right strategy is also important. Government has resolved to strengthen the institutions. Government has formed many task forces, commissions, and consultative groups. Various professionals are part of these. They are there on the basis of their competence and contribution. but they are there in their individual capacity. None of the chartered accountants selected by the government for these institutions is an official representative of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Pakistan. For strengthening of the institutions, it is necessary that Institute of Chartered Accountants of Pakistan should be officially represented in these commissions, task forces, and consultative groups. Ladies and gentlemen, in the end, I would present Quaid-e-Azam's vision about the economic system of Pakistan. In his presidential address at annual session of All India Muslim League in Delhi on 24th April 1943, Quaid said, "Here I would give warning to the landlords and capitalists who have flourished at our expense by a system which is so vicious, which is so wicked, and which makes them so selfish that it is difficult to reason with them. The exploitation of the masses has gone into their blood. They have forgotten the lessons of Islam. Greed and selfishness have made these people subordinate to the interests of others in order to fatten themselves. It is true, we are not in power today. You go anywhere to the countryside. I have visited villages. There are millions and millions of our people who hardly get one meal a day. Is this civilization? Is this the aim of Pakistan? Do you visualize that millions have been exploited and can't get one meal a day? If that is the idea of Pakistan, I would not have it. If they are wise, they will have to adjust to the new modern conditions of life. If they don't, God help them, we shall not help them." I have read many of the Quaid's speeches, but I haven't come across such a powerful piece in any other of his speeches. And imagine Quaid delivering this address to a gathering, mammoth gathering of All India Muslim League. So this was the vision. I don't think during the last 75 years since this speech was delivered, things have changed much in this Pakistan. We still have people who are unable to feed themselves and their children one square meal a day. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is not a taxation policy we are discussing today. It is not that we want to increase revenues of this country. It is not that we want to have a good balance of trade and a good balance of payment. It is the lives of the people we are talking about. If we cannot bring any change to the lives of people of this country, whatever surpluses we have, whatever foreign exchange reserves we have in our kitty, those are useless. There are countries in the world who have very high reserves, who have very good balance of trade, and who have good balance of payment. But when we look at the condition of people of those countries, we find that they are also unable to have one square meal in a day. We don't want a progress which does not change lives of the people of this country. I thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for staying here for the whole day, and I once again congratulate the organizers. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for spending all day with us. We have been hearing different stakeholders with different views from every aspect of the economy. So this is the right time to conclude our session, our day, with the speech of Mr. Ishfaq Tola, a vote of thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome him on stage. Okay.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you very much, everyone who has attended, especially Dr. Hafiz Pasha, who was there the whole day. My speakers, including Asif Haroon, Abish Shaban, and Aleem Saab, my distinguished panelists of all three panels, and especially those who raised the good questions. Unfortunately, due to cabinet meeting, the finance minister, he is still in the meeting. I just received a message that I'll be free by 7:30. So I told him I can't stop my people to that time. Anyways, next time he has promised me that I'll be there and we'll make sure that there shall be no cabinet meeting or any other engagement on his part. So we can bring him possibly in the post-budget conference, which we are planning subject to my approvals from the council and the broadcasters. We would like to have it online on a national basis this time. So hopefully, hope to meet you there. In the meantime, I'm extremely grateful to the team which worked day and night with me. Amara, Asad, Mansoor Zagam, Khalilullah Sheikh, and above all, Tahir, where are you? Please come. He's the real hero of the conference. Uwais Mukati, they all did wonderful job, and Mahmood bhi kiya. Mahmood, are you here? Furqan, they all have worked day and night just to make this event a success. And finally, I would like to request our Honorable President to come on the dais and give some mementos to the conveners of committee. Well done, Amara, well done, Tahir. We have divided the workload into subcommittees, and for that we have got quite a few conveners of those subcommittees are here. First of all, let me call Nasir Gulzar Sahab. Nasir Bhai was convener of subcommittee on interprovincial tax, and this harmonization of law was his brainchild. So please give a big hand to Nasir Bhai. Then we have a brilliant future convener of the committee, Mohammad Uwais. He headed this direct tax committee. Mohammad Uwais, put your hands together for Mohammad Uwais. Then another versatile professional in the tax field for ages now, educating people every day, none other than Asif Kasbati Sahab, please. Asif Sahab was heading this indirect tax committee, and especially he's here from Karachi. Other committee conveners, they are not here, so we'll distribute their mementos in any other events. With these words, may I request to kindly bring this memento for Shehzad Dedi. Shehzad, where are you? Another hard worker. He was awake for the whole night, most of the time looking after the arrangements here, and for next 2 hours receiving call from his wife. So Shehzad, good work, keep it up. Then a token of appreciation from this committee to my president. Please bring a memento for the president. With these words, I'm again thankful to you all for your participation, your active participation, and hope to see you in next conferences in much large numbers. Thank you very much. Pakistan Zindabad.
Pleasure meeting you, sir, and all the best, sir.
लाइफ को चेक करना पड़ेगा हमने बुक नहीं कराई है मेरी मीटिंग थी बस वो भी चेक करके कैसा आपका रखा था उसको बता के निकल जाएंगे 4 बजे कल कर दी 9:30 की बस हमने लिख कर दिया था कि चलो ये जाएंगे